Why was no one looking at her when she walked into the briefing room? The morning air hung thick over Claiborne compound. Humidity mixed with diesel fumes, creating that familiar scent of exhaustion before the day even began. Somewhere beyond the chain-link fence, a range buzzer blared three sharp notes. Not an emergency, just another reset. Lieutenant Drea Camden adjusted the strap on her helmet and kept her eyes forward. She'd learned years ago that the loudest voices in the room rarely belonged to the most dangerous people. The gravel crunched under her boots as she crossed toward the auxiliary gym bay. Around her, bodies moved with purpose. Elbows slammed into pads. Sweat dripped onto scorched mats. This was evaluation week at Claiborne, one of the lesser-known joint combat readiness hubs buried off the southern coast. If the humidity didn't test you, the eyes did. Mixed unit drills meant everything was up for judgment. SEAL teams rotated through for pressure testing. Marine close quarters combat instructors administered sparring segments. Air Force specialists hovered near the operations tower, eyes glued to timing metrics. Everyone was either being measured or doing the measuring. And respect in a place like this didn't come with insignia. It came with bruises, breath control, and knowing exactly how far you could go before command stepped in. Camden didn't talk much. She didn't need to. The only female operator in the rotating SEAL platoon assigned for the week, she'd been through 3 overseas combat cycles and carried a clean record. She walked like the mat owed her nothing. Her gear was squared away to the inch. Not a strap loose, not a helmet screw out of alignment. She moved quiet, direct, without the peripheral swagger that filled most drill bays. The ones who knew what they were looking for noticed. The ones who didn't, they talked. "You see her posture," one voice muttered near the weight racks. "Too stiff. She doesn't move like a shooter, more like a medtech." Another snorted. "Look at the gear, it's ornamental." The comments drifted toward her back like fog. She didn't turn, just secured the chin strap of her helmet, worn smooth by use, not styled for show, and joined the warm-up rotation like it was just another rep. Watching her were 2 men who made it their job to enforce the unwritten rules of Claiborne. Gunnery Sergeant Mitch Draven and Corporal Ellis Voss. Both Marine-side instructors, both sharp on technique but even sharper on one thing: pressure dominance. They didn't run drills, they ran initiations. Most called it hard prep or combat realism, but everyone knew what it was: hazing with plausible deniability. "Bet she breaks in 5 minutes, Draven muttered. "3 if we double press," Voss replied, tapping his gloves together. They didn't hate her, not personally, but Claiborne had rules and one of them was simple. If you walked in quiet, you'd leave on your back unless you proved otherwise. The Joint Unit Commander called the first round. Camden moved into formation like she'd been there for years. Her steps were crisp, her breathing steady. And even though no one said it aloud, something about the way she adjusted her gloves, a quiet roll of the knuckles left over right, made one of the recruits near the back stop smiling. Because some operators come in loud, but the ones who come in silent, you only hear them after everything breaks. The drill block was labeled Phase 4. Simulated capture recovery. A close-quarters response scenario where one trainee played the compromised asset and the others formed a rapid containment unit. Stress levels were designed to run high, but regulation force limits were strict. No excessive head contact, no helmet interference, and absolutely no gear tampering during live simulation unless pre-cleared. But those limits never really mattered to Draven and Voss. Their group, 6 rotating SEALs and 3 Marines, lined up along the inner ring mat while the instructor pair demonstrated proper positioning. Except, as always, their style was more spectacle than instruction. Elbows cracked into pads too hard. Shoves came with unnecessary follow-through. A new SEAL recruit got slammed hard enough to rattle his ears. No one called it out. Then it was Camden's turn. She stepped onto the mat, expression neutral, breath even behind her mouthguard. Voss circled left while Draven cut off the rear. Standard pincer move. The goal was pressure testing coordination under chaos, but from the way Draven grinned, something else was brewing. First contact was clean. Camden shifted stance, broke the fake grip, and moved to reset. But before she could pivot, Voss lunged sideways, slamming his forearm into the back of her helmet. The impact snapped her forward, not with concussion force but enough to stun. Gasps rose from the bench. It was meant to look accidental, but everyone knew it wasn't. She stumbled half a step, recovered, then reset her footing. Her hand went to the side of her helmet, adjusting it, tightening the strap. And that's when Draven moved in. He didn't strike. He grabbed. Two fists twisted around the helmet shell from behind and with a sudden yank, ripped it clean off. The chin strap caught and snapped. Hard plastic scraped her cheek. Her braid fell loose across her back as the helmet clattered to the floor near the gear bins. Silence. Even the other instructors didn't move. Draven stood smirking. Voss barked out a laugh. Guess she doesn't need headgear if she's not going to use it. Camden didn't move for a full 5 seconds. She just stood there, chin slightly raised, cheek reddened from strap friction, breath quiet. Then she bent down, picked up the helmet, and dusted it off. The mat felt like a vacuum. Not one word passed her lips. Not a stare. Not a threat. Not even a glance toward command. She turned, walked off the mat, and clipped the helmet back onto her belt loop without breaking stride. No protest. No escalation. But every person in that room, every recruit, every staffer, every ranking shadow watching from the mezzanine rail felt it in the back of their teeth. This wasn't pressure testing anymore. It was bait, and they'd just taken it. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have fought back immediately, or would you have walked away? Whispers started before she even left the mat. Did they really yank it off? She didn't even flinch. Yeah, but she didn't say anything either. That's not how you hold ground. By the time Camden reached the edge of the floor, the noise behind her had shifted from confusion to quiet mockery, the kind that simmers just loud enough to spread. One instructor chuckled under his breath. You've got to show teeth around here or they'll eat you alive. But Drea Camden wasn't interested in theater. She stepped into the far corner of the gear bay, crouched low, and examined her helmet in silence. Her fingers traced the fractured seam along the left side, just below the temple line where Voss's elbow had landed. The casing hadn't split entirely, but the shock compression mark was clear. A curved white scuff. Minor, but proof. She reached for the tape roll inside her gear sack, rewrapped the chin pad, adjusted the rear brace until it clicked cleanly back into place. Then she slid the helmet back on. A few yards away, Draven and Voss were already rotating back into the drill circuit, laughing with a cluster of younger Marines who seemed to think the whole thing was hilarious. Camden didn't watch them. She pulled her water bottle from the side pocket, took one measured sip, then another. Her pulse was steady. Her hands weren't shaking. She wasn't angry, she was calculating, because anger is noise. And noise gets you caught in bad positioning. She'd seen it before. Operators who let emotion dictate their next move usually ended up on the wrong side of a debrief. So she stayed quiet, she stayed sharp, and she waited. The rest of the afternoon drills passed without incident. Camden rotated through rappel prep, tactical movement scenarios, and endurance circuits. She kept her head down, her form clean, and her responses minimal, but the air around her had changed. People were watching now, not openly, just enough to see what she'd do next. Some expected her to file a complaint. Others thought she'd escalate during the next sparring rotation. A few assumed she'd just fade into the background and let it go. They were all wrong because Camden wasn't planning to speak. She was planning to respond, and there's a difference. Words fade, actions don't. By evening, the compound had settled into its usual rhythm. Recruits filed into the mess hall. Instructors gathered near the command post for shift notes. Camden ate alone at the far end of one of the long tables, her tray balanced on the edge, her attention focused on the plate in front of her. She didn't look up when footsteps approached, didn't acknowledge the presence of Chief Warrant Officer Lyle Morrow, one of the senior evaluators on rotation. He didn't sit down. Just stood there for a moment, arms crossed, watching her eat. "You good?" he finally asked. She nodded once. "Yeah," he waited. She didn't elaborate. After a long pause, he tapped the edge of the table twice with his knuckle. "Tomorrow's open mat, full observation. You planning to show?" She looked up then, just for a second. Her eyes were calm, focused. "I'll be there." Morrow studied her face, then nodded. "Good." He turned and walked away without another word. Camden finished her meal in silence. Then she stood, cleared her tray, and headed back to her quarters. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just walked with the same steady rhythm she'd carried all day. Inside her room, she set her helmet on the desk, pulled out her journal, and wrote 3 lines. Not about the incident, not about Draven or Voss. Just 3 tactical notes about footwork adjustments she wanted to drill tomorrow. Then she closed the journal, turned off the light, and lay down. Sleep came easy, because she wasn't afraid of what was coming. She'd already decided how it would end. Did she make the right choice by staying silent, or should she have confronted them immediately? The next morning arrived cold and sharp, the kind of morning where breath hung visible in the air and every movement felt heavier under the weight of what everyone knew was coming. Camden woke at 500, same as always. She dressed in silence, laced her boots tight, and clipped her helmet to her belt. The compound was still quiet when she stepped outside, but by the time she reached the auxiliary gym bay, the word had already spread. Open mat, full observation, and Lieutenant Camden had signed up. The gym filled faster than usual. Recruits who weren't scheduled found reasons to linger. Instructors who'd finished their rotation stayed near the observation rail. Even a few command-level personnel showed up, clipboards in hand, eyes sharp. Everyone knew something was about to happen. They just didn't know what. Camden stepped onto the mat at 6:30. No fanfare, no announcement. She just walked to the center, set her helmet down beside her, and began her warm-up. Her movements were fluid, controlled, each stretch deliberate, each rotation precise. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the murmurs rippling through the room. She was in her own space now, locked in. Across the gym, Draven and Voss entered through the south entrance. They were laughing about something, shoulders loose, confident. They hadn't signed up for open mat, they weren't scheduled. But when they saw Camden on the floor, their laughter faded. Voss nudged Draven. She actually showed up. Draven's jaw tightened. Doesn't matter, she's not going to do anything. Voss wasn't so sure. Maybe we should just relax, Draven cut him off. She had her chance yesterday. She walked away. That's the end of it. But Chief Morrow had other plans. He stepped into the center of the gym, clipboard under one arm, and raised his voice just loud enough to cut through the noise. All right, open mat protocol. Any personnel present can request a demonstration spar. Regulation limits apply. Full observation. Any takers? The room went silent. Camden stood slowly. She didn't raise her hand, didn't shout. She just looked directly at Morrow and nodded once. He met her eyes, then glanced toward the south side of the gym. Draven, Voss, you're up. The air left the room. Draven's face went pale. Chief, we're not scheduled. You are now, Morrow said flatly. Get your gear. Voss looked at Draven. Draven looked at the mat, and Camden just stood there calm, waiting. They had no choice. Not without looking weak in front of the entire compound. So they geared up, slowly, reluctantly. And when they finally stepped onto the mat, the crowd pressed tighter against the rails. This wasn't going to be a drill. This was going to be a reckoning. Camden didn't speak. She just lifted her helmet, slid it on, and adjusted the strap. The same helmet they'd ripped off her face the day before. The same strap they'd snapped. She'd repaired it herself, and now she was wearing it again. Draven tried to play it off. Look, yesterday was just... She raised one hand. Stop. He stopped. Voss shifted his weight nervously. We don't have to do this. She didn't respond, just moved into stance. And that's when they realized she wasn't here to talk. She was here to teach. The drill officer gave the signal. Draven moved first, trying to close distance fast, hopping to overwhelm her before she could set. But Camden didn't retreat. She sidestepped, angled her body, and used his momentum against him. Her forearm met his wrist mid-swing, redirecting the force cleanly. He stumbled, recovered, tried again. She was already gone. Voss came in from the left, attempting a double-team tactic. But Camden had been training for scenarios like this since before either of them knew what a mat was. She dropped her center of gravity, absorbed Voss's initial push, then pivoted sharply, using his own weight to spin him off balance. He hit the mat hard, not injured, just surprised. Draven charged again, this time with more aggression. Camden met him head-on. She didn't strike wildly. She didn't waste energy. Every movement was surgical. She blocked his jab, countered with a controlled palm strike to his sternum that sent him back 3 steps, gasping. The crowd didn't cheer, they just watched. Voss tried to grab her from behind. She felt him coming, shifted her hips, and used a textbook wrist lock to fold his arm inward. He yelped, dropped to one knee. She released immediately. No excessive force, just enough to make the point. Draven's pride was screaming now. He couldn't let this stand. He lunged without thinking, without strategy, without respect for what he was facing. And that was his final mistake. Camden met him in stride. Her left forearm snapped upward into his tricep, folding the arm before it could extend. Her right hand caught his jawline mid-rotation. She didn't strike. She redirected. His body spun involuntarily, and as he tried to recover footing, her boot caught the inside of his left leg with surgical precision, collapsing the knee and sending him down again. Not a slam, not a showy move, just gravity and precision, locked in. He gasped. She knelt beside him and, in a motion so fast it barely registered to the crowd, secured a shoulder pin with one elbow and applied a measured, legal wrist torque with the other. Pop. Not a break, but close. His scream came involuntarily, more surprise than pain. She let go immediately, stepped back, let him crawl across the mat. Voss finally pushed to all fours, only to find Camden standing over him, not with a raised fist or a triumphant pose, but with a look that said, "This is what silence earns." He tried to rise. She didn't move. He paused, then sat down. On the observation rail, Morrow finally uncapped his stylus and began to write. The rest of the personnel didn't move, didn't speak. The only sound in the room was the wind tapping softly against the bay's metal siding, and the ragged breaths of 2 men who had just been dismantled without a word. Have you ever seen someone command a room without saying anything? What does that kind of presence look like? Camden didn't gloat, didn't turn to the gallery. She walked to the center line, lowered herself into a controlled crouch, and tapped her gloves off. 1, 2. Then stood and removed her helmet, no sweat, just focus. She looked toward the drill officer, nodded once. Demonstration complete. Then she turned, hands loose, and walked off the mat. Draven was still on his knees. Voss hadn't gotten past sitting. No one cheered, no one clapped. Because when correction is clean and power is real, you don't celebrate. You just remember the sound of a helmet never being touched again. Command didn't have to ask for a report. The footage spoke for itself. By evening, the demonstration segment had already circulated through internal channels, evaluator logs, sensor sync reviews. The mat's pressure plates had registered 4 distinct impact points during Camden's counter-engagement, all within legal threshold, all flawlessly timed. Draven and Voss had both been cleared through medical. Nothing broken, nothing that wouldn't heal. But what did fracture was their authority. The moment Chief Morrow submitted the review summary, formal language followed. Observed deviation from protocol conduct during prior training phase, failure to maintain protective gear boundaries, resulting escalation within sanctioned sparring environment, resolved via operator-level correction under evaluation oversight. Translation: they started something. She finished it, and command wouldn't cover it. The following morning, the names of both instructors were scrubbed from the training boards. Not reassigned, removed, temporary suspension pending procedural review, no formal charges, no brig time, but in places like this, silence was worse. Their lockers remained closed. Nobody touched them. The hallway that once echoed with Voss's jokes went dead quiet. And Draven, who used to hold court near the spar pad entrance every morning, didn't show. Word was he packed up and shipped out before the sun rose. Nobody watched him leave. Camden showed up like she always did. No change to her routine. No announcement. No smirk of victory. She clipped her gear into place, ran warm-up solo, then took her position on the edge of mat 2 while the next instructor led the brief. At one point, someone tried to approach her. A junior Marine, not a talker, just one of those types who carried quiet respect but never knew how to show it. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then just nodded once. She didn't respond, not coldly, just didn't need to. When the drill began, she rotated in like normal, movements fluid, eyes forward, but something had changed. People made space now, not out of fear, not exactly, out of recognition. Because there's a difference between surviving the system and resetting it without saying a single word. Camden had done both, and as far as the brass was concerned, the incident didn't need further attention, because nothing builds discipline like exposure. And sometimes the loudest thing a Navy SEAL can do is break silence with a bruise. Do you think she should have spoken up sooner? Or was her silence the most powerful response she could have given? Compound didn't shut down. Drills didn't stop. Recruits still lined up for ruck inspections. Mats still got scrubbed, and the gym clock still buzzed every hour like it always had, but something in the air had shifted, like the entire place had taken a half step back to reconsider its own volume. The instructors who remained didn't say much. One or two nodded more than usual. A few started issuing corrections in a lower tone. Even the cocky ones stopped slapping backs when drills ended. No one mentioned Draven or Voss, but everyone adjusted. Camden didn't change. She ran her morning grip routine on the same torn callus pads. She timed her foot drills to the same playlist she never shared. She drank black coffee and retaped her left knuckle the same way she always had. Careful, clean, unhurried. The mat wasn't hers. She didn't claim it. She just walked on, stayed sharp, and earned the space around her. People moved aside now without thinking. It wasn't intimidation. She didn't carry herself with heat or menace. It was something else. A recognition of presence earned, not demanded. She didn't need to be loud. The silence around her said more than words ever could. One afternoon, while she adjusted the resistance bands near the south wall, a pair of new recruits paused mid-drill. "That's her," one muttered. The other didn't respond, just nodded, eyes locked on her form as she moved through a low pivot drill, every step controlled, spine straight, eyes forward. Across the gym, an older instructor, one who'd spent years on the deployment circuit, leaned against the rail with his arms crossed. "Never seen someone clear a mess that clean," he said to no one in particular. No one replied because there wasn't anything to add. Later that week, during an open floor conditioning block, Camden finished a set early and stepped onto mat 3. It was empty, most personnel still rotating between circuits. She didn't call for a partner, didn't signal a spar. She just stood there, helmet on, arms relaxed at her sides. One step forward, then another. A slow, deliberate circle tracing the edge of the mat. Her boots scuffed lightly across the vinyl as she walked, steady and unbroken, like she was laying a boundary only she could see. When she reached center again, she stopped, faced outward, and stood still. No one dared join her, not because they weren't invited, but because for the first time since the compound's rotation began, everyone understood who set the tempo now. Days passed, then weeks. Camden continued her rotations without incident. She trained hard, she stayed focused. She didn't seek attention, but she had it anyway, not the cheap kind that comes from showboating, the real kind. The kind that comes from showing up every day, doing the work, and never needing to explain why you belong. New recruits asked about her. Veterans watched her form. Instructors used her drills as teaching examples. And through it all, she remained the same. Quiet, controlled, unshaken. One morning, Chief Morrow called her into his office. She walked in, stood at ease, and waited. He didn't look up from his paperwork at first, just finished writing, set his pen down, then leaned back in his chair. "You've got orders," he said. She didn't react, just waited for him to continue. "They're pulling you for an advanced selection cycle, specialized unit, can't say more than that." She nodded once. "When?" 2 weeks. He studied her face for a moment, then added, "You earned it." She didn't smile, didn't thank him, just gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Understood." He stood, extended his hand. She shook it, firm, brief, professional. "Good luck, Lieutenant." "Thank you, Chief." She turned and walked out. No celebration, no fanfare. Just another step forward in a career built on competence, not noise. The last 2 weeks at Claiborne passed quickly. Camden trained harder than ever, refining techniques, tightening her form, preparing for whatever came next. She didn't talk about her orders, didn't mention where she was going, just kept her head down and did the work. On her final day, she packed her gear in silence. The same methodical process she'd followed 100 times before. Every item in its place. every strap secured, every piece of equipment checked twice. When she was finished, she slung her bag over her shoulder and walked toward the exit. The gym was full, morning drills were underway. But as she passed through the main bay, something unexpected happened. One by one, the drills stopped. Recruits paused mid-rep. Instructors lowered their clipboards, and without a word, without a signal, every person in that room turned to face her, not saluting, not cheering, just watching, acknowledging. A junior Marine near the door stepped aside, held it open. She nodded once as she passed. Outside, the morning air was cool and clear. The gravel crunched under her boots as she walked toward the transport vehicle waiting near the gate. She didn't look back, didn't wave, just kept moving forward, because that's what she'd always done. And as the vehicle pulled away from Claiborne compound, disappearing into the distance, the people she left behind went back to their drills. But they carried something with them now. A reminder, a lesson. That dignity doesn't need to announce itself. Strength doesn't need to be loud. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let your actions speak when words would only dilute the message. Camden never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She cracked their arrogance open with precision, reset the standard with silence, and walked away without needing validation. Because respect isn't given, it's earned. One controlled movement at a time. And in a world that mistakes volume for power, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should never underestimate. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.